What is up guys, in this video we will test and go through the main features of a Canon EF 24-70mm f2.8 L USM lens. This is probably one of the most well-known lenses in the world. It is the first version and wedding photographers used it a lot. I will cover 12 aspects of this classic lens, starting with physical features in the first part of this video and moving to image quality tests towards the end. Let's start with the first aspect, build quality. It is an L lens, built like a tank. It gives you the sensation that it will last a lifetime as long as you don't drop it. It will definitely hold up over time due to its good build quality. Both the zoom ring and focus ring turn smoothly, offering the right amount of resistance for precise adjustments. I have always liked the focusing distance indicator and I appreciate the simplicity of this lens, which features just one switch for turning the autofocus on or off. On the back, there is a metal mount. Next to it, a weather sealing gasket, which means that the 24-70 f2.8 provides protection from the elements. Second thing, compatible cameras. As you probably know, this lens was made for Canon's DSLRs. It works on full-frame DSLRs and also on those with an APS-C sensor. But times have changed and now we have mirrorless cameras. With the right adapter, you can use the 24-70mm lens on mirrorless cameras that aren't necessarily from Canon. You just need the right adapter and it will work. Let's examine the focal length. Ranging from 24-70mm, this lens is highly versatile because it covers the most wanted focal lengths, 24, 35 and 50mm. It's great for weddings, landscapes and essentially anything you can think of. If you mount it on an APS-C sensor camera, due to the crop factor, you lose access to the dramatic wide angle as its effective focal length will become 38 to 112mm. However, these focal lengths are highly versatile. Regarding size and weight, there's no reason to go easy on this lens. It is huge. When fully retracted, it extends the length of your camera by roughly 12.5 centimeters. It is also quite heavy, weighing roughly 1 kilogram. Regular use of this lens will build your muscles, and if you have small hands, it will definitely stretch your fingers. This is what it took in 2002 to build a lens that has a constant f2.8 aperture. Speaking about the aperture, the minimum constant value f2.8 is great in low light situations, especially on a full-frame camera. It is good for most situations and as you will see later, it delivers good bokeh. Just FYI, the maximum aperture value is f22 and the lens has 8 aperture blades. Regarding autofocus, this lens is a strong performer. It rarely hunts, offering fast and accurate focusing. Although the camera's autofocus capabilities also play a big role, with a more recent model, you'll notice the Canon 24-70 f2.8 holds up well. Even though it's an older lens, it's still good. The one thing this old titan is missing is image stabilization. While it not might be necessary for wider angles, you'll wish you had IS when you zoom in and want to maintain lower ISOs. Photographers might manage without IS, but if you're doing video work, this 1 kilogram lens might quickly start shaking. These were the physical aspects, but in order to reach a final conclusion, we also need to see the lens's performance in the image quality tests. Let's start with the first test, sharpness. On a full-frame camera at 24mm, we see decent sharpness in the middle of the image with nice contrast, but if we want to see good sharpness, we'll have to stop down to f4. Let's see the corner. At f2.8, sharpness looks bad only on the far edge. What we don't like is that green and purple chromatic aberration. Stop down to f4 for a small improvement in sharpness, but the aberrations are still there. Good results are at f5.6, but even at f8, we still have chromatic aberrations on contrasting edges. I'll cover diffraction performance later. Let's zoom in halfway to 45mm. We have lower contrast levels than what we previously saw in the middle at the widest aperture, but if we stop down to f4, everything looks great. In the corner, sharpness is not good, but at least we see less chromatic aberrations. At f4, we only see decent sharpness, and for good clarity, we'll have to stop down to f5.6, where unfortunately, we still see some color fringing. If we zoom in all the way, the middle of the image is quite soft and with lower contrast levels. The image improves at f4, but it's not excellent. In the corners, sharpness is neither great nor bad, with low levels of chromatic aberrations. An improvement comes at f4, and we see good sharpness at f5.6. Still, the aberrations don't go away completely. The image stays sharp until we reach f11, but as it happens with most lenses, at f13, diffraction starts softening the image and it continues to do that as we close the aperture more. A typical performance on diffraction and nothing spectacular overall. This lens is just decent on full frame, good enough for most cases. Let's now see its performance on a crop sensor camera. At 24mm, we get quite low contrast levels in the middle and sharpness is just average. A big improvement comes at f4. In the corner, on a crop sensor camera, the result is quite bad at the widest aperture. We'll have to stop down to f4 for a decent result, and good performance is at f5.6 on sharpness. We still see some chromatic aberrations though. At 45mm, the image is soft in the middle, with low contrast. It gets better at f4, but for a good result in the center, we'll have to go all the way to f5.6. In the corner, at f2.8, we can barely read the numbers. At f4, the image improves, and for a good result, we'll have to stop down to f5.6, where we also see lower levels of chromatic aberrations. At 70mm, the middle of the image looks bad at f2.8. Luckily, the image improves a lot at f4, but we'll still have to close down to f5.6 for a good result. Again, in the corner, things are not looking good. Fortunately, this lens always recovers quickly if we stop down to f4, but for a good result on a crop sensor camera, we'll have to stop down to f5.6. As always, a crop sensor camera is more demanding, but this old lens can recover quickly if we stop the aperture a bit. Distortion and Vignetting. Since there are no major issues on APS-C, we will see the results on a full-frame camera. We have all in-camera corrections turned off, and at 24mm we have a moderate barrel distortion. And if we open the aperture all the way, we also see strong vignetting. Only if we stop down to f4, those corners brighten up, but we still see some darkness on the far edges. So it's better to have the in-camera corrections turned on. At 35mm, there is only a small barrel distortion, and the corners at f2.8 are just a bit brighter than what we previously saw. At 50mm, the lines are nice and straight, but if we zoom in all the way, we get a small pincushion distortion. The corners are still dark at the widest aperture, but they look good at f4. An average performance on distortion and vignetting. Let's now see the close-up image quality. At the widest aperture, we just see a decent amount of sharpness and contrast. There's a significant improvement at f4, and if we stop down to f5.6, we get an excellent result. An above-average performance on close-ups. Let's check how it handles bright lights. Here, the result is neither bad nor good. We see a small loss in contrast and some flaring, but this happens only when the sun rays are hitting the glass directly. Finally, bokeh. We are now using a full-frame camera at normal distance, 6 feet away from our subject. At 24mm, we do get background-subject separation, and we could definitely work with that. Zooming in halfway blurs the background even more, although that background looks a bit harsh. Zooming in fully, and we see that this lens is a good choice for portraits, with the background slightly edgy, but decent overall. If we move one step closer, the background is nicely dissolved. Again, here we are at 24mm, where despite the wide angle, we get some blur, and if we zoom in all the way, everything looks good. It's not an excellent performance on bokeh, the background looks a bit edgy, but it's a good enough result. In conclusion, the first version of Canon's 24-70mm f2.8 is still a good lens. Although it is old and not as spectacular, it definitely still has decent performances. If you don't mind the size and weight, you will definitely achieve good results with it. If you enjoyed this video, press that like button and see you in the next lens review.